This video book brought to you by the Long Steel Rail Press. For more information, go to www.thethreadinthequilt.com. The thread, prepositional phrase, in the quilt.com. Thethreadinthequilt.com. The Table, 2017 by John Paul Wright. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any forms or any means without prior written permission, unless you are really famous and will be willing to invite me and about 8 hoboes over for dinner. Edited by Ron Whitehead, first edition. Cover painting by Jonah William Malik Wright. A few blurbs. J.P. Wright shares his story in a freewheeling, carefree yet raw and vulnerable cascade of images, emotions, and anecdotes, pulling the reader into his unconventional orbit of musicians, poets, labor activists, and other rabble-rousers. Wright offers immediate intimacy and an unfiltered, uncensored look at his life and the people in it, through stream of consciousness prose peppered with lyrics and poetry. As journalists, pundits, and politicians struggle to understand and categorize Americans, especially from Wright's region of the country, Wright defies easy definition and charges forth in search of himself, solidarity, and a better world. Carrie Liderson, journalist and author of books including Mayor 1%, Rahm Emanuel, and The Rise of Chicago's 99%, Haymarket Books. As a seasoned railroad worker and union activist, when I first learned of John Wright's poetry and music, I knew that I was experiencing a rare phenomenon. JP's songs come from real life, from day-to-day work 24/7 on the railroad. While the old railroad classics are among my favorites, anyone can play the wreck of the old 97 or the city of New Orleans. Brother John is talking modern-day stories, taking them from his and his co-workers' experiences and creating heartfelt, humorous, and often hard-hitting songs and ballads that speak intimately, not just to rails, but to anyone who has ever worked for a living. There is simply no one out there doing what J.P. Wright is doing. Ron Kamenko, General Secretary of Railroad Workers United. Joe Hill's will, property, maybe, of the I.W.W. Jumping Mouse story is in the public domain. Sing Out by Yusef Islam. Upton Sinclair snippet from the book Prophets of Religion, 1917. Hobo story from the book Smile by Dumpster Love. Wait for You, His Story by Sun Ra. Cover painting by Jonah. The Table. We who labor in the arts, we who are singers, we who are actors, we who are artists, we must remember that we come from the people, our strength comes from the people, and we must serve the people and be a part of them. Paul Robeson. Forward. In the early to mid-1990s, the streets of Louisville were on creative fire. Kent Fielding and I produced hundreds of music and poetry events, including 24, 48, 72, and 90-hour non-stop music and poetry insomniacathons. We also published hundreds of titles. Rant for the global literary renaissance was birthed in Louisville. Like a wildfire, it rapidly spread from local to national to international. I invited my friend John Paul Wright to participate in nearly everything we did. I asked him to perform with me, to perform solo and with his own bands, and to lead drum circles and open mics. As a university professor experiencing dyslexia when fatigued, having journeyed through numerous altered states of consciousness and out-of-body experiences via drugs and meditation, I instantly recognized brilliance and social dissonance when I saw it in a student's writing, in initial conversations with newly met friends, and in creative performances. Some folks told me John Paul Wright was crazy and warned me to avoid him. If I counted the times I've been warned to avoid folks because they're crazy, well, I wouldn't have any friends. All of my friends are crazy. So am I. Hellfire! Hunter S. Thompson called me crazy as 9 loons. And anyone who knows anything about Hunter knows that him saying that about you, well, it's a compliment. And I instantly recognized that brilliant craziness in John Paul. Shoot fire. He opened the door and tried to jump out of the car while I was driving 90 miles an hour on our way back from the 24-hour non-stop music and poetry insomniacathon Kent and I produced at the Lowell Celebrates Kerouac Festival in Lowell, Massachusetts. Kent and Tyrone Cotton grabbed John Paul and held on to him, pulling him back until I slowed down to 80 miles an hour and we got the door closed. Later that night, on the 15-hour journey from Lowell back to Louisville, John Paul and I were the only ones awake. We had an incredible 3-hour nonstop talk about birth, the journey, death, and the stars. John Paul is a brilliant cat. He is one of the best people I have ever met. No matter what anyone says about him, no matter what anybody says about me, by God, we are finding our ways, we're following our dreams. Good on you, John Paul, for being so damn stubborn and determined to be your true self, to be you. Ain't nobody like you. I'm honored to be your friend. Congratulations on your new book, Ron Whitehead, Kentucky Outlaw Poet. Introduction and dedications. This book is supposed to jump all around. It is supposed to be filled with names and people some of you have never heard of. This book is supposed to replicate what it is like to try to get your thoughts together when you are suffering from manic depression. It is supposed to be weird. So, this book is dedicated to all the folks who do not want to make an ebook. Whereas, this book is dedicated to anyone who has ever been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It is dedicated to anyone who has ever had to try and figure out how to make sense of this, that, and the other. It is dedicated to folks who are sick of the digital world. This book is a material object that you can hold in your hands and stick on a shelf. Big Brother will not be able to digitally lose or manipulate it. This book is ultimately dedicated to a people who remember only a few channels on the TV. It is also dedicated to folks who remember putting their finger in a hole and dialing a number on a phone. This book is dedicated to the people who enjoy the smell of used books and Smithsonian Folkways records. Whereas, this book is dedicated to I.W.W. members, hippies, environmentalists, labor union members, musicians, poets, socialists, Sufis, Jews, Christians, communists, Democrats, and so-called liberals, and even to some Republicans. It is dedicated to the folks who are sick of labels, sick of capitalistic branding. This book is dedicated to human beings, people. This book is dedicated to all the fine men and a few great women who I had the honor of working with for the last 15 years, railroaders. This book is dedicated to anyone who feels the spirit. Call it what you want to call it. This book is ultimately for my son, Jonah William Malik Wright, my best friend and ally. This book is a teachable moment. I have had the chance to study with some amazing people. I have had the opportunity to sit face to face with some of the most influential people that I could find. This book is a way for me to share with you all that I have found to be interesting from some of those close encounters. Please share this book with others. Find the time to look up the names of the people I mention in this book. Time is something we all wish we had more of. Time. I wrote this book over the course of many moons. As of the writing of this book, I am a locomotive engineer driving trains for sometimes 70 hours a week. I'm collecting fragments of memories that I have stored away like cassettes lost in a box and crammed in a packed closet. I have stirred up lots of dust in the process. Whereas, this book was hard to write. Talking about my past mental health issues was extremely difficult. Living with the thought of a relapse is something that I and others will always live with. The creative process can be quite confusing and somewhat of a burden. So therefore, be it resolved that I think nearly all people are brilliant in some way. I feel that people who do the labeling probably didn't know how to deal with the person that they decided to brand. I was branded a behavioral problem and stuck into the dumb kid group in Catholic school. So, early on, I wondered what was wrong with me. I think our schools have done many a kid a disservice, particularly now that the corporate model, the model that dehumanizes people with machines, has become the way forward. I hope we as a people will one day realize this. The machine? The brain is mighty. Humans will never be able to create an alternative to match the power of the human spirit. Some people are haunted by not being able to turn off the muscle in their heads. Some people are visionaries. Some are just normal folks who become brilliant workers, dreamers, and creators with skills that mesmerize the so-called educated. My teacher and mentor, Timmy Sorrow, taught me that people can be just like clay. Given the right attention, opportunity, and mastery, beautiful pieces of art can be molded and can take on a life of artisan completion and continuation. Mrs. Timmy named her organization after a word that means spirit, Pneuma, Pigeon Nest Education, Urban Ministry, and Arts. She also named it after a pigeon. She spoke to them. When I was at my mental worst, Miss Timmy knew that I was somewhat important. Several times in my life, I have called on her to help guide my thoughts. Timmy Sorrow is a Presbyterian minister. The first grant I ever received to study and teach music with my community was written by her. She made me sound like a superstar to the Kentucky Arts Council. She made all her kids feel that way. She knew her students, knew their spirit. Pneuma. I could write an entire book about what I learned from her. She was always on the side of the downtrodden, the underdog. So was my mother. I always find much solidarity with the people at the bottom, the so-called crazy people. Crazy people? Well, I love crazy people. In my home, ADHD is a condition that children suffer after being tied to chairs and subject to an unjust deprivation of the natural world. In my opinion, ADHD in my world stands for always dirty, happy dirty. ADHD can be cured with a Zebco 33 fishing pole, a number 4 Eagle Claw hook, a bobber, a cheap boat, and some night crawlers. ADHD can also be cured by locking up the corporate education professionals who have fallen prey to the digital monster known as progress and innovation. A little electricity is okay. Well, finding the corporate dingbats that have somehow decided to take the power away from the teachers, the ones who are well trained to make decisions about how to teach, shocking the corporate industrial decision makers with a 9-volt battery held to their tongues, well, that would be fun and quite educational. That statement is not to say some folks may suffer from ADHD, but I digress often. I am not a doctor. I am a folk musician, damn it. This book is dirty. I have enjoyed this vision quest of sorts. I hope you enjoyed as much as I have enjoyed sharing my experiences with you. I wish to thank Ron Kamenko, Baltimore Red, for introducing me to the I.W.W. and contemporary railroad hobo culture. Duncan Phillips, for putting that dirt from your father's grave in my guitar. I must thank all my International Steering Committee members of Railroad Workers United. I especially must thank Ed Michael for paying my initial membership into the Teamsters for a Democratic Union. I must thank Mel Mellick, my mother's partner. I need to thank all my friends and family who have ever worried about my creative, confusing energy. I must mention Timmy Sorrow, Alonzo Johnson, and Pneuma, especially the Pneuma kids. I must thank Wendell Berry for his work and invites to sit at his kitchen table. I have fallen into that well. Thanks, Ron Whitehead, for asking me to tag along. And thanks for the editing. We need to head down to the lake sometime and bask in some Central Kentucky time. I must mention all my movement friends. Mick Parsons, a muckraker extraordinaire. John Gage, my pastor and mentor. Ann Feeney for answering the phone when I call. I must mention Sue Mazik for allowing me to fill her ears with all of my frustrations involving the folk music business. I must thank Riley Coyote and the Rail Yard Ghosts, Dumpster Love, and all the spirits of the rail that have protected me. I also should mention Ira Grouper. He doesn't know what he wants to do with his life until he grows up. This book is absolutely and most definitely dedicated to Jonah William Malik Wright, my son and buddy. Peace. John Paul.